discovering more than that she must have passed through the ordeal of some great suffering at some former period of her life. Much in her manner, and more in her face, said plainly and sadly, "I am the wreck of something that you might once have liked to see, a wreck that can never be repaired, that must drift on through life unnoticed, unguided, unpitied, drift till the fatal shore is touched, and the waves of time have swallowed up these broken relics of me forever." This was the story that was told in Sarah Leeson's face. This, and no more. No two men interpreting that story for themselves would probably have agreed on the nature of the suffering which this woman had undergone. It was hard to say at the outset whether the past pain that had set its ineffaceable mark on her had been pain of the body or pain of the mind. But whatever the nature of the affliction she had suffered, the traces it had left were deeply and strikingly visible in every part of her face. Her cheeks had lost their roundness and their natural colour. Her lips, singularly flexible in movement and delicate in form, had faded to an unhealthy paleness. Her eyes, large and black and overshadowed by unusually thick lashes, had contracted an anxious, startled look, which never left them, and which piteously expressed the painful acuteness of her sensibility, the inherent timidity of her disposition. So far, the marks which sorrow or sickness had set on her were the marks common to most victims of mental or physical suffering. The one extraordinary personal deterioration which she had undergone consisted in the unnatural change that had passed over the colour of her hair. It was as thick and soft, it grew as gracefully, as the hair of a young girl, but it was as grey as the hair of an old woman. It seemed to contradict in the most startling manner every personal assertion of youth that still existed in her face. With all its haggardness and paleness, no one could have looked at it and supposed for a moment that it was the face of an elderly woman. Wan as they might be, there was not a wrinkle in her cheeks. Her eyes, viewed apart from their prevailing expression of uneasiness and timidity, still preserved that bright, clear moisture which is never seen in the eyes of the old. The skin about her temples was as delicately smooth as the skin of a child. These and other physical signs which never mislead showed that she was still, as to years, in the very prime of her life. Sickly and sorrow-stricken as she was, she looked from the eyes downwards a woman who had barely reached 30 years of age. From the eyes upwards, the effect of her abundant grey hair, seen in connection with her face, was not simply incongruous, it was absolutely startling. So startling as to make it no paradox to say that she would have looked most natural, most like herself, if her hair had been dyed. In her case, art would have seemed to be the truth, because nature looked like falsehood. What shock had stricken her hair in the very maturity of its luxuriance with the hue of an unnatural old age? Was it a serious illness or a dreadful grief that had turned her grey in the prime of her womanhood? That question had often been agitated among her fellow servants, who were all struck by the peculiarities of her personal appearance, and rendered a little suspicious of her as well by an inveterate habit that she had of talking to herself. Inquire as they might, however, their curiosity was always baffled. Nothing more could be discovered than that Sarah Leeson was, in the common phrase, touchy on the subject of her grey hair and her habit of talking to herself, and that Sarah Leeson's mistress had long since forbidden everyone from her husband downwards to ruffle her maid's tranquillity by inquisitive questions. She stood for an instant speechless on that momentous morning of the 23rd of August before the servant who summoned her to her mistress's deathbed, the light of the candle flaring brightly over her large, startled black eyes and the luxuriant, unnatural grey hair above them. She stood a moment silent, her hand trembling while she held the candlestick, so that the extinguisher lying loose in it rattled incessantly, then thanked the servant for calling her. The trouble and fear in her voice as she spoke seemed to add to its sweetness. The agitation of her manner took nothing away from its habitual gentleness, its delicate, winning, feminine restraint. Matthew, who, like the other servants, secretly distrusted and disliked her for differing from the ordinary pattern of professed ladies' maids, was on this particular occasion so subdued by her